Homage to wisdom, warrior, Manjushri. Homage to all lineage benevolent masters. The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered, even in a million eons. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize Tathagata's true meaning in order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, generate supreme bodhicitta. Now we continue studying the words of my perfect teacher on generating bodhicitta. In the section on generating bodhicitta, we are currently studying the 6 paramitas. The first 4 paramitas have been completed, and now we are on the 5th one, concentration. The paramita of concentration is divided into 2 parts, the necessity of concentration and actual concentration. First, let's explain the necessity of concentration. Actually, practicing meditation is extremely important for all of us, whether we are lay people or monastics as practitioners. If we don't enter meditation even for a moment and don't practice concentration, spending all day just talking theoretically or intellectually analyzing has no other benefit for our mind stream, because our afflictions actually arise from a scattered mind. As a treatise on the provisions for enlightenment also states, all afflictions of sentient beings arise from a disturbed mind. Therefore, wise ones extensively cultivate all meditative concentrations. So all wise beings earnestly and extensively practice the paramita of concentration, that is, the paramita of meditative concentration. Therefore, we ourselves know that in this world, those people with purer minds who love meditation and spiritual practice don't have many afflictions in their lives. They don't have much suffering or many troublesome matters. Because people who don't practice meditation, those with scattered minds constantly remain in states of restlessness, anxiety, suffering, sadness, and melancholy in such mental states. So practicing meditation is especially necessary for us, because through practicing meditation, the mind enters a very pure state. Once the mind becomes pure, we all know the external world also becomes very beautiful, and the life you live becomes quite joyful. So nowadays, people are busy all day long without opportunities for introspection. So the so-called afflictions arise one after another, constantly manifesting. If we don't first avoid all noisy and distracting environments and rely on a quiet place, then it's impossible for concentration to arise in our mind stream. So first, we must distance ourselves from distraction. For every one of us practitioners, this is extremely important. If we don't first avoid distraction, our practice will actually be unsuccessful. We definitely need to. It's best to leave. Of course, our current audience at the Academy can, relatively speaking, escape many distractions and rely on quiet places. Most people have such conditions. When hearing the principles of concentration, everyone feels they might have some opportunity. For people in cities, most of them probably don't necessarily have such opportunities at present. Actually, even if we can't leave, if we really cannot leave such places, we should still find every possible way to place ourselves in a situation. For example, setting up some shrine rooms in our own homes, or beginning to practice concentration during regular or irregular periods of time. Creating some similar conditions is actually not impossible to achieve. Actually, the commentary on generating bodhicitta mentions that in practicing meditation, one doesn't receive negative influences from external circumstances, and the mind remains in a state of happiness. This is what's called self-benefit. Through meditation, one can teach many sentient beings and maintain mindfulness for long periods. This can be called benefiting others through meditation. On the surface, beginners in meditation seem to have limited self and other benefit. But actually, they can tame their own minds, which is self-benefit. Through contemplation, aspiration prayers, and dedication with a pure mental attitude, helping sentient beings can be indirectly manifested and realized. We should contemplate like this. All gatherings have the nature of separation. For example, parents, siblings, spouses, relatives, and friends. Even our own bodies and flesh that we've brought from birth will also one day be separated individually. Since this is so, what's the use of our attachment to impermanent relatives, wealth, parents, and so forth? We should think about this again and again. Attachment to relatives and friends. For worldly people, abandoning relatives and friends is indeed unbearable, a tragic action. Some people, after ordaining, including their relatives and some of their friends, feel their behavior is too lacking in compassion. But truly, from the perspective of truth, there's nothing that can't be severed, because after leaving, they seek another kind of truth, which worldly people cannot necessarily accept immediately. Previously, during Tang Emperor Xuanzong's reign, there was a monk named Congjian. When he was a layman, he had children, but later, after ordaining, initially another emperor destroyed Buddhism, trying every way to make him return to lay life, but he didn't disrobe. Later, when Tang Emperor Xuanzong restored Buddhism, he himself began practicing in a quiet place in a hermitage. Later, his former son, after several decades had passed, searched everywhere trying to find his father. He came to the door and began asking where he was. He clearly knew this was his own son, but deliberately deceived him, saying he should be in the southwest direction. He pointed to another direction and didn't acknowledge him. After he left, he closed the door and never met him again. From a worldly perspective, this is an especially heartless and cruel act. But actually, as a seeker of liberation, it was also worthwhile. Why? Our current worldly relatives and friends will one day be separated. Some people think if everyone received such education, many would ordain, including our relatives. Harming them this way might cause problems for important matters. They think this way too. But whether we think so or not, the truth of this world is like this. We can see from history as well. The path of ordination is not a path of escape. Of course, we don't dare say all people have no phenomena of escape. It's not like that. But we should say, for the majority, it's for seeking truth. Because after seeing through the world, there's only this one path of light to seek. There's nothing worth being attached to. After contemplating this way, one should constantly dwell alone. As Master Shiwa also said, alone, one cultivates Buddhahood. With two companions, one cultivates virtuous connections. 3 or 4 create causes for attachment and anger, so I dwell alone in peace. Master Shiwa was Milarepa's great disciple. Those who have read Milarepa's biography know Shiwa was previously an especially wealthy person. When he was riding a horse across a river, Milarepa asked him if he could lend his horse so he could cross the river, but he didn't agree. As a result, when he reached the middle of the river, the water was particularly deep. He wasn't called Shiwa before. He nearly drowned. At that time, Milarepa crossed over, displaying miraculous powers without his feet touching water. He developed tremendous faith, both confessing and saying, I have a very good sister. Would you like me to offer her to you? And talked for a long time with Milarepa about various possessions. Milarepa said he didn't want anything. But actually, Milarepa had earlier received a dream from a dakini saying a 20-year-old young man would come before him. This is your heart, son. There was a prophecy. From then on, Milarepa gradually accepted him. Among Milarepa's disciples, he was the most outstanding in renouncing worldly life. Shiwa wore only one cloth garment his entire life. He never changed clothes. The wealth he accumulated, including his food, at most he would store what he could use for 2 days. Beyond that, he never accumulated anything. Later, when Milarepa passed into nirvana, at that time Shiwa was also at that time. The dakinis were preparing to take Milarepa's relics to the pure realm. Rechungpa was especially heartbroken and requested the dakinis not to take the relics away. Later, the dakinis said, Milarepa had already transmitted the Dharma relics to you. The Dharma has already been transmitted to you. What use are these physical relics? We're taking them away. Later, Shiwa also made a request. But probably after Shiwa's request, the Dakinis still took the relics to the pure realm as before. Later, in some historical accounts, it's said Shiwa also flew to the pure realm without abandoning his physical body. He was such an extraordinary practitioner. He said, "Generally speaking, it's best for practitioners to practice alone. Such practice is very successful. Many ancient practitioners also practiced in solitude. Previously, there was Chan Master Weize at Buddha Cave. I think I may have mentioned him before. He was from the Song Dynasty, continuously building hermitages near Mount Tiantai, covering the roof with fallen leaves, building hermitages and meditating there for a very long time. He drank clear water and ate some fruits, staying there like this continuously. Later, a woodcutter came there and saw an old monk. He asked, 'How many years have you stayed here?' He said, 'I have already stayed here for 40 years. The woodcutter asked, 'Do you have relatives and friends?' He said, 'I have many relatives and friends.' Then he clapped his hands. As a result, many tigers, leopards, and various fierce beasts came around. The woodcutter was extremely frightened and terrified. At this time, the master also said, 'Don't be afraid,' and had all the fierce beasts return to where they came from. He then formally said, 'As for my relatives and friends, the mountains and rivers, earth, trees, flowers, plants, insects, snakes, wild beasts, etc., are all my true Dharma companions.' At that time, the woodcutter developed faith in him and requested to be accepted. Later, the master accepted him and transmitted instructions to him. The so-called Buddha Cave school is a specific lineage within Chan Buddhism. This lineage began to appear from that time. There is such an account. Practicing alone, of course, ancient masters. If someone really doesn't dare to live alone in the forest, if it's inconvenient for one person in various ways, especially for women in retreat, 2 people can work together, one person protecting the retreat and one person in retreat. With 3 or 4 people or more, there are too many people and it ultimately becomes a cause for afflictions. So at that time, he also chose to practice alone. Desire is the root of all evil. People often possess property and enjoyments, but don't know satisfaction. And as wealth increases, the miserly mind also grows more and more. Generally speaking, on the surface, it might seem that people might be miserly when poor, because their wealth is insufficient. And as wealth increases, they might become more generous and not miserly. But the facts are not like this. As the verse says, "Whoever possesses wealth is miserly. Whoever possesses abundant wealth is especially miserly." It's also said, the more one has, the greedier one becomes, like a wealthy person. The more wealth one has, the more one feels poor and attached, just like a wealthy person. Many wealthy people themselves have especially abundant wealth, but actually, they themselves are reluctant to part with it and are unwilling to make offerings to others or use it. When without wealth, one is free from enemies. When without wealth, one has actually distanced oneself from enemies. People with wealth who haven't renounced are troubled day and night every day. But when without wealth, living a pure and simple life, at the end, all the former enemies, robbers, etc. have already departed. Whatever food, property, and enjoyments one possesses only brings harm from enemies, thieves, and such. Relying on such wealth, one constantly consumes one's life, accumulating, guarding, and increasing it until one's natural death. Actually, all our wealth should be said to constantly make our lives consumed and unhappy. We often also teach that, firstly, distraction obstructs our liberation, and the fundamental cause of distraction is actually wealth. The Sutra of the Supreme Mindfulness of Wondrous Dharma also mentions, distracted conduct is the root of samsara. Pure conduct is the foundation of peace. Actually, true distraction and wealth are the root of our falling into samsara. while having few desires with a pure mind and contentment are the foundation of eternal peace. Other than suffering and creating negative karma, there's nothing else. Therefore, the noble Nagarjuna also said, accumulating, guarding, and increasing wealth are all suffering. One should know, wealth is the source of limitless troubles. Actually, wealth must first be accumulated, then made to grow, and then protected and guarded, etc. Actually, wealth is the source of immeasurable suffering. If we truly seek liberation, we must definitely distance ourselves from wealth. If we don't distance ourselves from it, we will never obtain true happiness. Why? Because liberation can actually only be obtained through a pure state of mind. When you're in a state of disturbance or in a state of distraction and attachment, in such an environment or lifestyle, there's simply no way. So, since ancient times in our worldly history, great masters have all dwelt in quiet places, and those who live permanently in these quiet places, not to mention worldly people, even celestial beings led by Indra, prostrate and pay homage to them. The sutra on going forth also says this. Those who seek liberation should not depend on crowds and disturbances. From Indra on down, all pay respect to those who dwell alone in quietude. The meaning is that those who seek liberation should preferably not depend on all kinds of worldly disturbances and noise, but distance themselves from the mundane world. When distanced from the mundane world, all celestial beings pay respect to them, and all their actions also fulfill their wishes. So, I often think about those of us living in big cities who may not necessarily have the opportunity in this lifetime to completely distance themselves from such environments. But we should purify our minds and simplify our lives as much as possible and not be overly attached to wealth. Some lay people might be too extreme, immediately throwing away all their possessions and making offerings. In the end, as householders, they themselves also experience certain suffering. So the lifestyle in Buddhism avoids both extremes. Too much, as mentioned in Letter to a Friend, is the same. And the treatise on the great perfection of wisdom also says, when seeking desires there is suffering, when obtaining them there is much fear. When seeking wealth, it's also very painful. After obtaining it, it's still very painful. When lost, one harbors burning anguish. At all times, there is no happiness. The meaning is that when first seeking wealth but not obtaining it, it's extremely painful. After obtaining it, there's fear. Fear of enemies taking it, or fear of it being depleted, etc. When it's lost, there's also suffering. Actually, the happiness brought by relying on material possessions is extremely rare. Here it says, at all times, there's no happiness. At all times, there's no joy. There might be a little bit. Some people feel it's not like this, saying it's wrong. When I have money, how happy I am. I can enjoy myself. If you have money, give it to me. If you can't spend it all, I'll spend it, no problem. As long as there's money, happiness will forever accompany our entire lives. Actually, it's not like this either. Nowadays, worldly people, for example, those in cities, first buying a car is very difficult, and after buying it, it's regular maintenance. The other day, someone from the city said he bought a car for 100,000 yuan, with great difficulty borrowing money and pooling funds to buy it this way and that. After buying it, he really had no way to find a parking place. When he inquired later, the parking place required 150,000 yuan. If he paid the 150,000, he still couldn't find any parking place, so he was extremely troubled. This is a reality. Nowadays, when material wealth becomes increasingly abundant, people's minds become increasingly restless, and there's nothing that can be done about it. Some of our individual practitioners pay lip service saying, distance yourself from all wealth, don't come near it, don't be attached, let go and see through it. But actually, just saying these beautiful words doesn't solve anything. We need to understand its faults so that people don't become overly attached. Living with a relatively suitable and appropriate lifestyle is sufficient. We're not saying to completely cut off all enjoyments of the 5 desires and from then on sever all connections with any wealth. This also can't be done. Actually, many people pay lip service to this, but in reality, truly being able to live in hermitages and mountains like in the past, 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 might be very rare nowadays. But actually, we must understand the truth that Buddhism teaches. After we understand it, people won't completely become slaves to money and wealth. They won't become like that. So ultimately, all wealth doesn't have much substantial meaning. Even if a person possessed all the wealth and enjoyments of the entire Jambudvipa, actually, it would only satisfy the food and clothing of that one person. There's nothing else truly in terms of its value. For example, if one person possessed all the wealth of Jambudvipa or the wealth of an entire country, he himself could only eat, only use, and only wear so much. Beyond that, there's basically nothing else one person could enjoy. However, some people, no matter how wealthy they are, can't bear to eat or wear nice things even for themselves, actually disregarding all negative karma, suffering, and harsh words. Such wealth obtained destroys their future lives. Actually, any person's wealth doesn't come through good means. We should say, most of it involves some negative karma. Wealth in this life perhaps ruins one's present life and also destroys one's future life. For the sake of meager wealth, they disregard their lives, ignore shame and conscience, human ethics and long-standing affection, and don't consider the Dharma and vows, always living through greed for wealth, food, and profit. Just like hungry ghosts seeking food offerings, never having enjoyed even one day of leisurely, comfortable, happy days. While rushing about busily, the journey of life has already reached its end. It's very pitiful. As the Buddhist sutras also mention, being attached to treasures one doesn't realize when death arrives. Body and life are exhausted moment by moment, yet one cannot perceive this. This should be mentioned in the Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma as well. A person attached to wealth doesn't know when death comes. Their entire body and mind are completely exhausted, moment by moment, constantly attached to wealth, and finally, at the time of death, they still haven't realized it. Worldly people indeed, for the sake of wealth, use up all their energy and time, but in the end, it's possibly heartbreaking. As Nagarjuna also said, though wealth and status are pleasant, all is impermanent. Though wealth superficially seems to bring some happiness, ultimately it's still impermanent. Why? The 5 destroyers share it all, causing mental distraction. All 5 destroyers will share it, causing mental distraction. All wealth is ultimately impermanent. We can see from history what happened to many wealthy people. The wealthy people from decades ago, when they finally left this world, what became of their wealth left behind, everyone should be clear about. These people, for the sake of wealth, disregarded shame and everything else, including some people now who truly disregard the Dharma and their vows for wealth. They will do any bad deed, but in the end, they gain nothing at all. Actually, our true wealth is spiritual wealth. People who understand this point are not very many in this world. In Patrul Rinpoche's instructions, there are also many especially profound principles. I hope we can observe the world and see what worldly people's values are like, and what kind of views we ourselves have about wealth and our surrounding life. These are not just teachings meant for others. Each principle should be used for self-reflection. When we encounter material possessions or encounter distractions, with what kind of mind do we counter them? With what kind of contentment and few desires do we live our lives? This kind of practice can't be accomplished in a day or two, or within a few years by living slightly superficially. In the end, when all conditions are truly present, going with the flow, this is not called being a practitioner. Actually, being a practitioner should be a long-term commitment. Many people nowadays, when they first begin studying Buddhism and practicing, see through everything and need nothing. But the path of practice is indeed quite long. On one hand, on this long path, not backsliding is especially important. Including some of our volunteers, it appears that at the beginning they are all enthusiastic, but in the end, not to mention in the end after 2 or 3 years, some people's true nature can already be seen. At the beginning it was, I want to benefit all sentient beings, but in the end, the attitude of benefiting all sentient beings might be gone. Perhaps some people think, for example, I'm working for a certain master or a certain practice center. It's not necessarily for sentient beings. Actually, this kind of thinking should be unreasonable. When I first came, I had thought like this. At that time, His Holiness Jigme Puntsok, from the surface, it seemed like the academy was his practice center. If I did anything for the academy, whether teaching at the academy or volunteering for the academy, on one hand I was being responsible to his practice center. It seemed like it didn't have much to do with me personally and didn't have much relationship with other sentient beings. But actually, it's not like this, because any Buddhas and Bodhisattvas benefit sentient beings through a main channel. Amitabha Buddha also manifested establishing his practice center, and through this method benefits countless sentient beings. So sometimes some of our people might also have this reasoning. I'm now volunteering. I want to benefit all sentient beings. I don't necessarily need to depend on a certain monastery or a certain master's activities to spread the Dharma. I should have my own. If you yourself have this ability, it should be possible. Previously, I've also discovered some people preparing to be independent, but later they might have independently self-destructed and didn't succeed. Most people, because their merit is insufficient and their motivation, ability, and resources are insufficient, all kinds of conditions are not complete. There are many factors. At the beginning, when thinking about it, everything seems wonderful. For example, if a person builds a house, very simple, I'll also build a house. But actually building a house might require many conditions. What others can do, I might not necessarily be able to do. Nowadays in the world, some people in cities have already made fortunes through stocks. Some have made money. I'll go trade stocks, no problem. Then they invest all their money. People without merit, in the end, even their principal doesn't return. In the end, they are left with only long streams of tears. The tears can only be licked by their tongues, and when licking them, they taste sweet. This is their only enjoyment. Other than this, they gain nothing. So I think in our world, whether it's spreading the Dharma and benefiting beings, or practicing oneself, many people nowadays lack patience. After 5 or 6 years or 8 or 10 years, wow, I've been doing this for so many years. That's amazing. Now I'm retiring. Actually, from one's actions, one can see the determination. In practice, if one doesn't have a determined mindset for practice, nothing will necessarily succeed. Perhaps thinking of changing one's attitude might be better. Changing the practice center, changing the teacher, changing the tradition. But changing back and forth like this, change, what does one end up with? Perhaps very few individuals like Milarepa didn't achieve great perfection, but then achieved Mahamudra. This exists. We don't exclude this possibility. But many people change back and forth and in the end don't even know what direction they're headed. Some become like this too. So sometimes our true practice also requires a kind of patience. Relying on quiet places also requires this. Most fundamentally, as a practitioner, if your mind is completely attached to material possessions, fame, and the 8 worldly concerns, then inner practice can be said to be hopeless. Therefore, constantly praying to the Guru and the 3 jewels is very important. Without merit, one constantly generates all kinds of negative thoughts, and unknowingly, one's direction has already become unclear. Finally, one heads toward a cliff. There is such danger. In the end, the wealth one has repeatedly accumulated becomes one's killer. It's for this wealth that one dies under the sharp blade. there are many such cases. As a result, the wealth and enjoyments accumulated throughout one's life are used by enemies and others. In this way, wealth has been wasted in vain, but there's nothing that can be done. Most people's wealth, what they themselves can enjoy, is not very much, and what one gets for oneself is the negative karma created for this, heavy as mountains. What does one finally bring? In the process of accumulating wealth, all the negative karma accumulated is waiting for you ahead, causing oneself to wander indefinitely in the unbearable lower realms. So if you are slightly better off financially, then seize the opportunity while you have freedom in this life. You should accumulate some excellent provisions for the next life. We now have something I often use as an example. For instance, charging a cell phone. If I charged it yesterday, I can use it today. If you want to use it tomorrow after using it today, you still need to charge it. Otherwise, if you don't charge it today, you might be fine, no problem making phone calls. But tomorrow and after, there will be no way. So many of us now, some people have money, some have status, some people have various kinds of enjoyments. This is the merit each person created in past lives. It's absolutely like this. What we become in the future depends on how we are in this life. So if a person is especially foolish and has no concern for the future whatsoever, it's fine if you don't accumulate provisions. It's fine if you don't practice virtue, creating negative karma all day, just like some foolish people in the world now, every day killing and committing arson, and in the end, spending their entire lives in prison. In this life, simply being able to fill one's stomach and cover one's body should be enough to know contentment. One should have such an attitude. Furthermore, those who constantly pursue the benefits of this life are called companions of the foolish. Some people only care about this life and don't care about the next life. They don't think about the next life at all. Such people are called foolish. Actually, the foolish, whether in our Buddhism or in seeking truth, should be especially frightening. Why? Because associating with them destroys our spiritual aspiration. As it's also mentioned in compilation of different stories in sutras and vinayas, better to throw oneself into a coal furnace or leap from a mountain into a deep valley. A deep valley refers to a cliff, jumping down from a mountain like that. Better to encounter a 7-step snake alive than to associate with the foolish. The meaning is, better to throw oneself into a fire pit or into a cliff or to encounter a 7-step poisonous snake while alive. A 7-step snake is a poisonous snake that will cause your death within 7 steps after it bites you. But encountering these poisonous snakes is not a big deal. But the most frightening thing is the foolish people in the world, like the foolish ones extensively described in the concentration chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva. If we constantly associate and socialize with such foolish people, there will be no good benefit. Helping and benefiting them will instead result in being harmed by them. They repay kindness with enmity. Like this, no matter how one acts, there's never a satisfying moment. They're very difficult to please. These ordinary people, no matter how we try to accommodate them nicely with ordinary people, there will never be a time of pleasing them. There will never be a time when they're happy. Some ordinary people, with especially bad character, only by completely leaving them can one be happy. If you surpass them, they will become jealous. If they surpass you, they will also use various methods to despise and look down on you. No matter how one associates with them, it will increase negative karma and diminish one's virtuous deeds. Therefore, we must definitely keep far away from them. Would this violate the Bodhisattva vows? No, it wouldn't. I think there will be no one who upholds Bodhisattva vows like Shantideva. But Shantideva, in the Way of the Bodhisattva, repeatedly says, "Leave these evil people, leave these foolish people." So some people at the beginning think, this bad person is also pitiful, that bad person is also pitiful. and then they put poisonous snakes in their bosoms. Only when the poisonous snake bites them to death do they realize, oh, I shouldn't have had such compassion for poisonous snakes. At this time it's too late for regret. So for those truly selfish and self-centered foolish people, if we were to always associate with them and accommodate them, there would be no way. Liberation would be impossible. Though worldly affairs might succeed, so in the relevant sutras and treatises, especially if one truly wants to practice, foolish people who provide no conducive conditions and no benefit to one's practice, one must definitely leave them. Only by leaving them can we truly attain liberation and happiness. If one relies on agriculture, industry, commerce, or culture and extensively socializes, being constantly distracted by numerous affairs, this is true disturbance. If agriculture, industry, commerce, and cultural education, technology, etc., actually many of these are, for those who practice meditation and quietude, a kind of distraction. Being busy all day long brings very meager benefits. No matter how diligent one is, there's not much real meaning, because these affairs are endless. Subduing enemies is also boundless. There are countless resentful enemies. America arranges various armies every day to subdue many neighboring countries, but they can never be completely conquered. When one country's enemy forces are basically reduced, another country's enemy forces begin to appear. So subduing enemies is also endless, and helping relatives and friends is also without end. Today you help this person, tomorrow you help that person. How many people? If you have to help them every day, it's truly exhausting. So as a practitioner, none of these are worth being attached to. Therefore, we should, like spitting out saliva, discard all trivial matters and distractions that have no end. True practitioners have nothing they dare not say. They should do their best to cast aside and abandon these worldly concerns. That is to say, leaving one's homeland and going to a foreign land, dwelling in rock caves, befriending wild animals, and taming body and mind, abandoning clothing, food, and reputation, to spend one's life in uninhabited mountain valleys. True superior practitioners. Most people nowadays simply cannot do this. Some people carry backpacks and go to some caves, but after less than 2 days, they've already returned. From then on, they never go to caves again because they fear tigers and fear wild rabbits. No tigers came, but wild rabbits ran around near the cave at night, so they thought it was gorillas or wild people coming. From then on, they never went again. But the great masters of the past were not like this. He completely left his homeland and permanently dwelt in mountain caves. These wild animals became his companions, and he lived there for a long time. He abandoned all fame, status, and wealth. He had nothing at all. Of course, as people living in cities and bustling areas nowadays, we can sincerely rejoice in, admire, and aspire to such behavior. I myself, when I was young, especially longed for this. But looking at it now, it might not necessarily be realizable, because looking at my own various circumstances from the past few years, sometimes when a person's karma is very heavy, what the mind wants may not necessarily be realized. I think most of us here, firstly, many people's health is not good, and we also lack such conditions now. Nowadays, basically many people are attached to material enjoyments, perhaps abandoning everything and living in the mountains for a few days or months, but being able to live there long term for over 10 or 20 years, actually dying in mountain valleys or caves, there might not be very many. Actually, I'm thinking, if we can't become superior practitioners, being middling practitioners is also possible. We should try our best to reduce worldly trivial affairs. From the time we have, we should extract part of it to practice liberation methods. We cannot completely go along with worldly people and foolish people. Completely mixing with them every day is also unnecessary. So for people born in cities, what should be done? Going to work. Whatever needs to be done should also be done. Otherwise, sometimes Buddhism sounds especially good at the beginning. Should I immediately get divorced and quit my job? But we need to consider many things. There are many responsibilities. Otherwise, if you haven't completely achieved it. Of course, if you can truly become such a practitioner throughout your life, it's also possible. The Buddha also permits this. But some people are not like this. It's momentary impulse, a sudden mindset, in a brief period of time. Wow, I should be able to see through everything. But will it be like this next year or after a few years? It's hard to say. So sometimes Buddhists should still consider carefully. Perhaps this kind of consideration is a great obstacle to ordination and practice. But the Buddha also mentioned in relevant sutras and treatises that one must use wisdom to make decisions. If one truly practices long-term in quiet mountains, many virtuous roots, renunciation, bodhicitta, will naturally increase. Master Milarepa also taught this way. In uninhabited mountain valley caves, constantly maintaining renunciation and world weariness, the Guru is the Buddha of 3 times. Intense faith never departs. This scriptural quotation, for a practitioner, truly describes his spiritual state in accordance with Dharma. Whether dwelling in mountain caves, rock caves, or forests, practitioners in quiet places, because of the blessings of quiet places, constantly maintain renunciation and world weariness in their mind streams. It seems like all the various affairs of the city have no meaning. Such renunciation arises naturally. The kindness of all gurus who transmitted profound pith instructions to oneself is constantly remembered, and such gurus are regarded as emanations of the Buddhas of the 3 times, generating intense faith in the Guru. This intense faith is not being good to the Guru today, and tomorrow, because of various reasons, the relationship becomes bad, then starting to slander and speak of faults, gradually abandoning the Guru and seeking a second Guru. The second Guru also doesn't match well, so seeking a third Guru. With the third Guru, the relationship is temporarily better. But again, one might leave at any time, or problems might arise at any time. Such behavior is unreasonable. So the qualified spiritual teachers that the past masters relied upon, they always maintained faith in them at any time, and under any circumstances, their faith would never waver. Actually, quiet places indeed have such qualities. I myself sometimes feel when in cities, I don't feel anything. Whether faith in the Guru, renunciation, world weariness, or bodhicitta, sometimes I feel I have a little bodhicitta. Sometimes I feel like I have no renunciation or bodhicitta at all. But no matter what, faith in virtuous Dharma, in the Guru and 3 jewels, and aspiration for liberation should be there. But this is very much related to environment. In some especially bad environments, it seems like there's no feeling at all. For example, when I recite daily liturgy and chant sutras, in the process of chanting, it's like being in a daze. Anyway, this needs to be chanted daily, chanting while dozing off. After finishing, it's fine, it's completed, then immediately put the book aside. But in quiet places, I myself am like this, going to other quiet places. Sometimes there are also some feelings, but they're not as good as at the academy. Perhaps it's His Holiness Jigme Punsok's blessings or my own karmic connection. I don't know. Sometimes going to some caves and other places doesn't feel as good as the academy, so I myself try my best. Sometimes when outside, except for teaching Dharma, I try to return to the academy. After returning to the academy, it seems like many of my feelings have been restored after leaving. Especially staying in cities for a particularly long time, my enthusiasm for practice gradually becomes especially weak. I have this feeling. For each person, perhaps everyone's practice situation is different, but no matter what, perhaps for any person, when they arrive at especially quiet places or monasteries, naturally faith in the 3 jewels arises in their minds and strong enthusiasm for liberation arises. But when they go to some especially restless cities, especially where greed, anger, and various afflictions are particularly strong. When people generate various afflictions, virtuous mind will naturally be extinguished. So in this process, as for Milarepa, he constantly regarded the guru and qualified spiritual teachers as Buddha. In such a mental state, he continuously lived in mountain caves until his parinirvana. If one acts according to what the master taught, that is what's called concentration can arise in places that make one feel sad. Places that make one feel sad, seemingly, especially remote places, especially quiet. It seems ordinary worldly people simply have no way to survive there. Such sad places. Actually, true concentration can arise in one's mind stream. I went to Samye Chimpu, and there are some individual mountain caves of Venerable Longchenpa and Jigme Limpa. When first arriving, sigh. This place, not to mention long-term, staying even one night would be very difficult. But after living here, the feeling is completely different. If in other cities' hotels or luxurious houses when first entering, wow, this place is especially comfortable. Practicing meditation here should be no problem. But sitting, then looking around, wow, everything is very comfortable. In such comfort, sometimes concentration can unnecessarily arise. This principle, I also share some situations from when I went to Mount Wutai last year. My situation might not be shared by everyone, but because all sentient beings' conceptual thoughts are the same, there might be commonalities. Dwelling in quiet places naturally will give rise to renunciation, world weariness, faith, and pure mind concentration, meditative stability, and all other virtuous qualities of the true path. So we should do our best. Everyone should do their best. Pachu Rinpoche also said this. We can't speak too absolutely. Everyone's circumstances, practice, and spiritual capacity are all different. Everyone should do their best regarding meditation practice. Some people have slept for a very long time and cannot wake up. Anyway, I'm doing my best. If I really can wake up, I'm also doing my best. If there's really no way, do your best. Quiet forests are also places where Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past attained cessation. There is neither disturbance nor distraction, nor farming or business. Far from foolish companions, living day and night with birds and beasts. It's truly incomparably joyful, drinking pure spring water and eating natural tree leaves. In this way, awareness naturally becomes clear and meditative stability naturally increases. Pure places should be like this. Previously, there was a Chan master named Weize who also lived in quiet places for over 20 years, seeing through all things and letting go of all connections. From his biography, there is his biography in record of the exalted acts of Buddhist monastics. When it's convenient, you can also take a look. Actually, these biographies of Chan masters and great masters of Tibetan Vajrayana, after reading them, indeed generate tremendous faith. Their entire life depended on natural clean water and fruits for sustenance. But many of us practitioners might not necessarily be able to completely eat fruits and drink clear water nowadays. But we can't be too picky about our food or have too high demands. We can't go without enough food, and what we eat needs to be hygienic and clean. This is very important. Now, many practitioners, some people don't wash their bowls at all because their practice is so accomplished. They don't wash pots either. It looks actually this is very unreasonable. We should have a kind of, especially when volunteering to cook, hygiene is extremely important. I've also mentioned before at the academy that volunteers in various departments, hygiene, including what you yourself wear, people who cook, especially their clothing must be clean. If clothing is not clean, if worn somewhat dirty, then when I see this, his hands are so dirty and his clothes are so dirty, then what he cooks must not taste good. Just looking gives this feeling. So volunteers, especially those making offerings to the Sangha, and sometimes shouldn't just make whatever comes to mind. Regarding nutritional aspects, adjusting the combinations a bit is also very important. Don't make the same thing every day. We are not yaks. A little bit, because financially there's no difference. If there's no financial difference, changing the color a bit and changing the method a bit, this is necessary, as bodhisattvas considering everyone's taste. Of course, satisfying everyone is something no one can accomplish. 10 people have 10 different demands. Some people are especially picky. This doesn't taste good. That doesn't taste good either. Especially when he eats better and lives better. When he's not hungry, nothing tastes good. There's this feeling. Actually, this also cannot be excessive. But the key point is regarding our current diet, especially for practitioners. Current practitioners relying on Chinese medicine and nutritional science. Many Westerners nowadays care greatly about nutrition. This is very important. Indeed, in Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, and other approaches to body protection, as a practitioner, maintaining and protecting the body, including in different weather and different places. Like on our Tibetan plateau, what kind of clothing you should wear is beneficial for the body. What to eat, it also can't be too excessive. Some people who know a bit of Chinese medicine every day say, oh, carrots combined with what? Every day. Except for food combinations, they don't consider any practice. This is also a bit excessive. But I think people can't have excessively high demands, nor can they be too foolish about everything. If we were a pack of hungry dogs, we could just mix anything and feed them. It can't be like that either. Nothing should fall into extremes. This is very crucial. This is why we study the middle way. Actually, the meaning of the middle way is quite extensive. What was I just talking about? I should have been talking about practicing in pure places, naturally giving rise to such certainty. There are neither enemies nor relatives. Clearly, one is freed from all nets of attachment and anger. It's a good place, endowed with many virtues. Truly quiet places naturally possess all virtues. At that time, as also mentioned in the Buddhist sutras, if under mountain trees one constantly practices meditation and contemplation, then one attains pure wisdom, free from all faults. One can attain pure wisdom and be free from all faults. This should also be mentioned in the Sutra of the Right Mindfulness of Dharma. So whether under pure trees or in pure quiet places practicing well, there are various kinds of contemplation. The precious human life is fine, impermanence of life is fine, or the visualization of highest tantra states. In this way, your wisdom when the mind is pure, actually wisdom opens very easily. Some people say, blow on me, bless me, I'm too stupid, my wisdom won't open. Actually, when a person's mind is very pure and constantly focused on truth, wisdom will naturally open. If the mind all day thinks about random nonsense, not only will your wisdom not open, it will become more and more confused and blind. Not to mention, personally, going to quiet places, even cherishing the aspiration for quiet places, and merely taking 7 steps toward that direction surpasses the merit of making offerings to the Tathagatas of the 10 directions for eons, numerous as the sands of the Ganges. Actually, this is mentioned by the Buddha in the Moonlamp Sutra, slightly different from the previous translation mentioned in the Moonlamp Sutra. The meaning is that if we personally go to dwell in quiet places, of course, the conditions would be very good. But even if you don't have this, if you want to go to quiet places, for example, if I'm thinking in Chengdu, oh, I want to go to a quiet place, if I look towards Mount Wutai, then the merit of taking 7 steps in the direction of Mount Wutai far exceeds the merit of making offerings to the Tathagatas of the 10 directions for eons, numerous as the sands of the Ganges. So some people say, so-and-so has already arrived at some quiet monastery. He originally wanted to ordain, but later his family tied him up and brought him back in a taxi. What a pity. Actually, it's not a pity. He wanted to ordain, he wanted to go to a quiet place, not just 7 steps. He'd already come many steps, so this merit is very great. The Buddhist sutras also mention dwelling in deep mountain, excellent quiet places, all deportment becomes virtuous. In quiet places, all deportment naturally becomes virtuous. Your walking, standing, sitting, lying, many deportments naturally. Even there without deliberately striving to practice virtue, yet renunciation, world weariness, loving kindness, compassion, etc. All virtuous qualities of the true path will spontaneously arise. So all one's actions also naturally become entirely virtuous, dharma. All the greed, anger, and delusion that one strives to restrain in noisy places, yet finds difficult to stop, will naturally diminish when arriving at quiet places. Many people have especially deep afflictions in other places, but when they arrive at quiet places, they become like completely different people. When he was originally in the city, he was especially bad and would do all kinds of evil deeds. But later, after this person ordained, truly there's no difference between him and the monk Ashvajit. When walking, it's like walking with eyes closed, extremely quiet. Various path qualities also easily arise in one's mind stream. What has been explained above are the preliminary practices for concentration. Therefore, they are extremely important and indispensable.
Om